July 16th, 2022. Yeah, I want to discuss something today, get into an issue of the environmental movement and particularly the focus on moving away from gasoline-powered automobiles and et cetera into the electric-powered vehicle. And the kind of rush to do this and what's been going on in the economy do that. This kind of has been highlighted because of Biden's trip to Saudi Arabia to beg for them to increase oil production, and there's a lot of issues around that that are kind of worth focusing on, I think, and some issues that we need to see. One thing I want to point out here is the idea of replacing a very large amount of the energy consumption that the country does in terms of the gasoline and diesel that's used for our automotive and truck fleets with some kind of electric vehicles pose, in my opinion, a major threat to a pretty stagnant electric grid we have right now anyhow. I mean, if we look at the growth of the electric grid, which was going pretty readily until the beginning of the last decade, and then all of a sudden it's been going up only slightly since then, and most of the contributors are, of course, the addition of wind and solar. Internally, there's been a shift, from coal over to natural gas during that period too. But ultimately, but there haven't been that many electric vehicles added yet. And I think since we already have power grids that are facing, warnings about potential blackouts, actual blackouts occurring in places like California in recent times, I think this it suggests that embarking on this expeditiously is not the thing to do. By the way, point out, if you like these videos, please subscribe. You can give me a like, which really appreciate because it helps out with the algorithm. And then you can click the bell for notifications, and of course, comments are appreciated. This is so that my thinking is that until we actually have perfected the cars a little bit better, and until we've developed a plan to expand the power grid in a suitable way, it's simply a bad idea to start processes that are holding back the development of refined gasoline and so forth, which we've been seeing. I mean, the Biden administration has actually been using regulations and other economic incentives to sort of, reduce our refining capacity already. In fact, one of the biggest problems right now is that, for instance, we know about the case in which oil was exported from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to China. Well, why would that happen? Well, basically because we don't have the refining capacity to refine everything that's being pumped out. So the surplus had to go somewhere, so they sold it on the world market, and I guess China bought it. So this is not, this kind of shows the foolishness of depleting our strategic reserve. At the same time, we're really being held back by refining capacity. This thing that's going on with Saudi Arabia, for example, is mainly in order to provide oil on the world market so that Russian oil can be taken off of the European market, and they can get a replacement. I don't think it's really for the United States at all, really. So this to kind of illustrate the kind of foolishness going on. But think about this, the amount of energy involved in all the gasoline used in cars. If that was replaced with electric vehicles, how much extra energy would have to be provided to the power grid, and what's going to generate this? I mean, and what is the utility in doing it this way? For one thing, we have had a period where personal consumption has kind of gone down over time in recent years, but that's largely due to basically, the replacement of the incandescent light bulb with compact fluorescent, and then finally LED now, and other, as houses become more, efficient and so forth. But there's a limitation of how much these kind of savings are going to develop and going forward. And so, and if our predictions of hotter temperature really come true, which I think is still a controversial issue, there's still going to be extra demand for air conditioning. So, and now if we're going to put on the electric grid all these cars, in addition to the other problems with the cars, I think that we'll just overload the grid and start having blackouts. We really can't afford to do this until we have a suitable alternative source of electricity. Now let's look at this situation. Wind and solar are the growing areas. In fact, almost all the focus on growth is in wind and solar, but these are somewhat questionable sources of energy. For one thing, wind is somewhat unreliable because it depends on how much wind you have. If you have windy days or if you have windless days, you have a completely different outcome. Similarly, solar is not any good at night, and of course, there can be areas where it's more effective than not, and hot desert areas, I guess it works better, but not at night. And without adequate storage, it can't completely replace other sources. And so, unless you have an integrated plan of how you produce energy and have reserves to handle periods where these somewhat intermittent sources are available, you're going to have problems. And now you load up all the automotive fleet on the same grid. I think it's just a bad idea. Nuclear as a component has pretty much remained roughly constant for some time since 3 Mile Island, I guess. It's shrank a little bit due to some shutdown, but this is an area which probably should be pursued if you're going to go to electric vehicles. Of course, electric vehicles have their own problems, which are noted that they take longer to charge than it would take to fill up a car with a tank of gasoline for a gasoline-powered vehicle. And there are other issues that have shown up. I mean, they rely on batteries, which are basically being produced mostly in China, and you have to look at the overall global environmental impact of this sort of thing. There's a lot of issues in which it's very questionable whether electric vehicles are net positive from an environmental point of view when all factors, including the mining and the disposal of the various components, are taken into account. One also has to consider issues that might occur, during car accidents and so forth, with highly charged batteries being damaged and so forth. These are all major issues of how suitable these vehicles really are as a replacement, and not to mention the fact that they're significantly more expensive than a comparable gasoline-powered vehicle. So, all in all, I think that we're being led down the wrong path here. And I know it's interesting enough that this massive bill that they're trying to revive in the Senate that's kind of hit the skids because Senator Manchin, who was apparently going along with this at the time of my last video, apparently since then has now put the brakes on most of it, with the exception of some drug price issues and some money for the Affordable Care Act funding. So, at any rate, I think that really we ought to, rely on our own sources of oil at the moment and not try to move expeditiously away from it, or to try to artificially force us into a new economy until we have the power sources for that worked out, until the concepts are better developed. What I might say about it is that it will be pursued obviously at some level simply because people want these vehicles. A few people want them, at least. Some people do and can afford them. And so they will be developed, and we'll get the experimental results of trying these out as the fleets grow somewhat. But I don't think we should try to force the growth rapidly, but simply let them grow at a natural economic pace, depending on the consumer demand and the available resources. Anyway, that's just kind of my thought on the subject, and I may see if y'all have any comments on it either. I know a lot of this stuff gets into kind of emotional, kind of stone throwing between one side or the other, but I think rationally, I think it still suggests don't move too fast, particularly the issue that I don't believe you can have an energy economy primarily based on solar and wind at all. I think the storage issues on that are just not developed yet. So anyway, I'll wrap this up for now. By the way, links to, well, not links, but I always say links. I mean to say the addresses of my social media accounts and the names of them are all listed in the description below. And until next time.